Hi, my name is Jeff Glaza, and I'm here today to talk a little bit about various weapons used by the cavalry during the Civil War. Cavalry being the mounted branch of the service, mounted being on a horse. So let me start by saying the weapons we use when reenacting, which is what we are, Civil War reenactors, the weapons we use are actual weapons, but they are reproductions. Original weapons are seldom, if ever, brought out on the battlefield because they're too precious a resource to get damaged while doing reenactments. So having said that, let me start by talking about the various weapons that we have here today. What a lot of people think of as the primary weapon of a cavalryman is a saber. Here at the end of the table, my friend Bull is showing you a typical Confederate saber. They're about 36 inches long, and you think about, you use a big long knife like that to stab someone. However, it's not a stabbing weapon, it is a striking weapon. It can have, but does not necessarily have a sharp blade edge. It's used to strike with great force, and that will cause the skin to burst and perhaps broken bones. So that would render your opponent useless in a battle situation. Again, while a popular movie item, sabers were not used very much during the Civil War because, well, we had different weapons. You didn't want to get that close with your opponent. So an invention, the pistol's been around for a long time, but in this case, the revolving pistol was a new part of warfare. An early version of a revolving weapon from Samuel Colt is the Colt Walker. It was developed prior to the Civil War, but it was sort of the equivalent of what you would call a Magnum revolver. It holds a large amount of powder, a .44 caliber bullet, and was used by troops before the war known as dragoons. They were horse soldiers, but this weapon is probably 8 pounds of pistol and is referred to as a horse pistol because you would carry it in a holster that was attached to your saddle. But should you and your horse get separated, you needed something that was a little more portable. The horse would take off with this gun if it was still in that holster. So that brought us to a more recent development before the war, the Colt Army. Again, this is a pistol very much like the Colt Walker, only you could see it's scaled down. It's lighter, it can be carried on a belt. These are what you call single action revolvers. To fire it, you have to pull the hammer back each time you want to pull the trigger, and it would hold 6 shots, still a .44 caliber with a lesser powder charge, so it's not going to shoot quite as far. Another type, and this is a reenactor sort of thing, this is a different variation, a more modern variation on a Colt gun. No Colt gun ever actually was made with a brass frame. But as reenactors, we try to present things that look as close as they can to the original things without being original. We pass it off as a Confederate version. And what I mean by that is the Confederacy did not have the access to all the steel and other resources that the North did. So they would use brass in place of, I think was a Spiller and Burr revolver. Had a brass frame, and it was very largely used by the Confederacy. So this particular gun, this pistol, is a real reenactorism. Another type of revolver that was used is an improvement on the Colt design, whereas you notice the Colt on the cylinder, it was open at the top, what they call an open top revolver. The Remington pistol, the new model 1858, had a more solid frame with a backstrap along the top, which made it more durable and more serviceable. This was the primary pistol of the Civil War. I think it's 190-some thousand of them were made, whereas the Colts were still, actually I'm going to take that back, I think it was 124,000, where the Colts about 120,000 were made. But they both remained very popular pistols up through the 1880s. I think it was Wild Bill that carried a pair of Navy 36s, that's the Colts, with the open top. All of these weapons were loaded in the same way. Bull's taking a walk, and I said, I'm going to give you this. Just sort of walk through how you would load it. Here is a simulated paper cartridge. The cartridge would have powder on one end and the bullet at the other. With the loading lever in position there, you would load the cartridge into the pistol and then press it down with the loading lever. Then a percussion cap would be applied to the back end of the cylinder on the nipple, and it would be prepared to fire. Now, a percussion cap is a development of about the 1830s, 1835 or so, and it's a little copper cap that had a liner of fulminate of mercury, and when the hammer struck that, it would cause a spark and it would set off the main powder charge in the weapon. One of the things people misunderstand about cavalry, during the Civil War, cavalry was largely used as mounted infantry. The saber fight and pistol fights were really quite rare. Pistols were very popular among guerrilla warfare and raider types. Like one of the groups we portray is the 6th Kentucky Cavalry, which was part of John Hunt Morgan's Raiders. And those men were known to carry anywhere between 2 and 6 pistols. Reloading a pistol on horseback, even with the pre-made cartridges, is difficult at best when you're on the move. So the primary weapon of a lot of cavalry, particularly Nathan Bedford Forrest of Tennessee, Mississippi fame, his troops used long guns. I'll take that pistol, Bull, and you can show him our Enfield musketoon. The musketoon is a shortened version, right here, a shortened version of an Enfield musket, which was the weapon of the infantry, which it was probably 8 to 10 inches longer. And this is a muzzle loading weapon. The round, if a soldier, he would take his ammo and he would have to rip open the cartridge, most likely with his teeth, then pour the powder down the barrel, and the cartridge also contained a bullet. It was a .58 caliber bullet, and he would put that down and then use the ramrod to ram the load home. Now you can see right off the bat why doing this on horseback would be difficult, but it could be done. And then of course a percussion cap of the correct size, and here's one of those, would be applied to the back end on the nipple at the breech of the gun, and that's how you would fire it. Now with the powder and ball loaded and the cap applied, it's in battery ready to shoot. So again, this weapon was used by a lot of dismounted cavalry after they would dismount. The cavalry would divide up into groups of 4. Out of every 4 horses, 3 men would dismount and hand control of their horse to another man. Then those 3 would advance on foot into the line of battle. So this kind of weapon would be handy for that, but not so much for shooting from horseback. The Sharps carbine, our next carbine in line here, was a big advent. It's what's known as a breech loader. It would use a cartridge, and I'm going to show you this. This is a dummy up cartridge, but you would load a cartridge into it from the breech of the gun. Just don't shove her in there too far. And then after the cartridge was in place, you would lift the lever and the block would come up and cut off the back end of the linen cartridge, exposing the powder. Then a percussion cap was applied, just as in the other case, and then the gun was ready to fire. This could be done from horseback. On the opposite side, though, away side of the gun here, you'll see there is what's known as a saddle ring. So the mounted trooper would have a sling that would go over his shoulder and attach to the rifle there, so that's how he would carry the weapon, but he could load and shoot this from horseback. Again, not commonly done because, again, from horseback, you're not sitting on a stable platform. Being on the ground with a long gun like this is a much more accurate way to shoot. Now our next piece, our next carbine, and these, thanks to our friend Bullskin here, these are actually original pieces. We would not take these again out on the reenacting field because they're too precious to worry about damaging. But our first example is a Maynard carbine. It too is a lever operated break action. You see there, you pull the lever down that doubles as the trigger guard, and the rifle opens at the breech where you could place a brass or metallic cartridge in, close it up, apply a percussion cap, or in the case of early Maynards, they used a ribbon like a tape that had primer material in it, and then you could fire the weapon. Again, they were really popular, but only about, and a very good gun, but only about 20,000 of them were made to be used in the war. Our next example is a Maynard. No, that was the Maynard. This is the Smith carbine. The Smith carbine is similar, but right inside the trigger guard, you will notice a T-shaped button. To load this, you push the button in, and then the gun would break action there. And you would load it from the breech with either a rubber or, what's the word I'm looking for here? Or a metallic based cartridge that would load in. Then you could close the break action, and again, it would shoot with a percussion cap, much as we've talked about in the other weapons. It too, and all these carbines are equipped with the saddle ring so they can be carried easily from horseback. Our third and the most manufactured gun or carbine of the Civil War, this is a Spencer carbine. About 94,000 of these were made during the war. And it's a lever action weapon that had a magazine that would load in through the back end, the buttstock. So you would turn that, and you could load 7 rounds in that hole, replace the spring, and then as you operate the lever, it would put each round into the chamber. You just cock the hammer from that point. Yeah, we're getting that in there. But you can see even there's not always a, but you operate the lever to load around, cock the gun, and fire. And again, just as fast as you could cock the lever and pull the hammer back and fire, you could fire off 7 rounds. There was a box known as a Blakesley box, which could hold, if I'm not mistaken, 9 magazines worth of ammo that you would pull the spring-loaded magazine out, dump the bullets in, replace the spring, and you could go. And that way you could reload a whole lot quicker. This is an example of what a Spencer bullet looks like. It's a 56 caliber, 5650 it was called, 56 caliber bullet on a 56 grain powder load. And I omitted to say the Maynard and the Smith both used 50 caliber rounds. The Muscatoon used a 58 caliber round, and the Sharps carbine, I believe, was a 52 caliber round. Now, the Spencer, again, was the most popular gun of the time, at least as far as government purchase went. I think about 94,000 of those were purchased, and somewhere in the region of 86,000 of the Sharps carbines were used. The Smith and Maynard, both around 20 to 30,000. Now, the Henry rifle, which we have remaining, was an item not overly favored by the federal government, who again had the money to buy them. Initially, they used to cost about $47, which was about 6 months' pay of your basic infantryman. But it was a lever action rifle, much like modern lever actions. This was kind of the granddaddy of all those. This was made by, it was called the New Haven's Arms Manufacturing, but they were in fact owned by Charles Winchester. And of course that evolved into Winchester Arms. This is virtually action-wise, this is the same as the famed Winchester 73, which is oftentimes known as the gun that won the West. It was loaded in a rather strange fashion. It was not a breech loader, but there is a spring you would raise up, and there are some faux bullets right here, Bull. And you would load it through the top end of the tube magazine by dropping the bullets down in there. It used a 44 caliber Henry rimfire cartridge. and then you would allow the spring to fall down on the rounds, and then as you operate the lever, it would load the chamber, and as you shot them, that's how she worked. And that, I said, yeah, that used a 44 caliber bullet. So those are just, there were a number more, probably 20 different carbines that were used by the cavalry during the war. Some that were specifically made in the South, and to put a point on it, the Southern Army would use whatever weapons they could come by, even those they picked up on the battlefield. So that, I guess that really kind of concludes our demonstration. These are just a small sample of the weapons used by the cavalry during the Civil War. Thank you for watching.